This is the Parents in Sport podcast. Amazing guests, honest conversations, topics that matter.
Welcome to season 3 of the Parents in Sport podcast. I am your host, Gordon MacLelland, and I'm delighted to be joined today by sports psychologist, author and podcaster Dan Abraham. Dan, thank you for joining us on the show.
Hey, I am super honoured, super delighted to be here with you, Gordon. Really excited. So thank you for the invite.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I'm really excited about this particular episode, and it was great to join you on your fantastic podcast, probably about 18 months ago now. The last couple of years seems to have disappeared on us all, I think.
Yeah, I actually think it was possibly pre-COVID. It was just as it was all unfolding. I think, if memory serves me, I might be completely wrong there, but so the landscape has changed. Let's just look at it that way. Since we sat down and recorded for the Sports Psych Show, which is my podcast. But I know your episode was so well received by my audience, and I'm just looking forward to answering some of your questions you've got for me this time.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. Roles reversed slightly this time. But Dan, just tell our listeners who don't know you as well as I do, just a little bit about your background and your work.
Sure. Well, I am, as you've mentioned, I'm a sports psychologist. I am a fully qualified, fully registered sports psychologist, which isn't meaningless because some people call themselves psychologists when they don't necessarily have the qualifications or the registration, but that's probably another story and a different podcast in and of itself, Gordon. But my background prior to sports psychology, I was a professional golfer. And as I always say, half tongue in cheek, I wasn't the best professional golfer, but half true as well. I mean, if I'd won any money, I probably wouldn't be talking to you now. I'd be probably sunning myself in Florida or something like that. So I wasn't the best professional golfer, didn't win any money, largely because of what was going on between my two ears, I would say, probably more so than a distinct lack of talent, although that was slightly lacking perhaps in certain departments as well. And so I finished playing because I realized I really wasn't going to be able to pay the bills. I coached the game for a little bit. I became a registered coach or qualified coach with the PGA of Great Britain. But I'd always loved the psychology of sport. I always had. I was at 15, 16 years old. I was reading sports psychology books. So I wasn't much of a tearaway teenager, that's for sure. As I was coaching the game, my love, I saw a few sports psychologists for my own golf during my career. And as I was coaching the game, I fell in love even more with the psychology of engagement, of learning, of teaching, of growing, of performance. And so so I decided, okay, well, look, I'm going to coach, but I'm also going to go and do a degree in psychology. So that's what I did. And then I did my master's degree. And then I came to a crossroads. And 16 years ago, I think it is now 17 years ago, I decided to put golf to the one side. And I became that fully qualified and registered psychologist that I am today. So it's been 17 years of a snowball effect, and there's been some great things, and there's been some brilliant things, and there's been some frustrating things, but that leads us to 2022.
Yeah, amazing story, and it's I guess led from one thing on to the other. Obviously, leaving sport and then staying within the sport. I think lots of us have probably failed as sports people, but then wanted to stay involved because we enjoyed the sporting process. And you've obviously worked around the world, Dan, as well. You've worked with lots of individuals, lots of teams as well. It's not just an individual thing you've done.
Oh, certainly not. And if anything, I would say most of my work now is in team sports. So that's not to suggest I'm not doing a lot of individual sports. I mean, when I sat down and decided, okay, this is what I'm going to do for a living, I obviously knew golf like the back of my hand. But I also felt that what was important to me was to learn another sport in a very deep way. I mean, as a sports psychologist, you can work across all sports. Of course you can. And it's not necessarily our job to know the ins and outs, to have a granular knowledge of the sport that we're working in. We just can't, because we work across too many sports. But I did feel that I really wanted to learn a specific sport really, really well. And that happened to be football, soccer, if you like. So, 15, 16, 17 years ago, I started to get involved in non-league football to learn the language of the game and learn the specific challenges the players face, to really become acquainted with that landscape. And so I've worked heavily in football for the last 15, 16 years, been blessed to work with Premier League teams, Premier League players, clubs, teams, organizations, governing bodies, individuals, coaches, players globally over the last 15, 16 years. I've had 4 books I've written, 3 of them in football. One of them was a global bestseller, I'm proud to say, and one of which Gareth Bale very kindly suggested changed his life, apparently. I mean, I'm not sure if that's true, but that's what he came out and said. So that's been great. I was lead psychologist for England golf between 2013 and 16, so still doing a lot within individual sport from that perspective, and worked in tennis with the LTA for a little bit and various other individual sports. And then I was lead psych for England rugby going into the last World Cup. And I worked with other rugby teams and with Olympians and all sorts of sports people. And I do a bit in the corporate sector as well. So it's all good fun as far as I'm concerned, Gordon. And sometimes people actually believe that I know what I'm talking about occasionally. So it's all good.
I think with that track record, I think you must know something, Dan. And obviously today's shows to try and help parents, and actually we picked the topic today to talk about managing match day and competition. Now, I know it's a massively challenging time for a parent. I still find it hugely challenging now, having still sort of spent 5 or 6 years at the coalface, I guess, both with my son and daughter. What are your thoughts, just generally, around match day and competition, young people's sport as they're learning the games or making their way in sport?
Yeah, sure. Look, I mean, I think my initial thought is probably similar to what the main messages that are coming through from people like great people like yourself, who are heavily invested in helping parents understand the sporting landscape. On competition day, there's really not much you can do. There are various things that you can do, and especially from a mental perspective that we'll come on and talk about. But when it comes to parental behavior, when it comes to parental attitude, parental stress, if you like, for me, in my opinion, the best thing a parent could do is sit back, watch your child play, enjoy it, irrespective of what goes on the field, the court, the course, the pitch, and be there to support vocally in an appropriate way. If that can be accommodated, to enjoy every second of it, and to be able to ask the right questions prior to and post game. Again, we'll come on to that. Reinforce the right things, and that's it, really. I don't think there's anything more, in my opinion, and it's just my opinion. And you would, to be honest with you, Gordon, would know more about this and look more at the nuance and the complexity and the granular detail more than me. But I believe it's important for parents to take a step back and just watch and enjoy, because too often over the last 15, 16, 17 years, I've listened to young players and even older players who have had poor experiences of parents being present at their game during a competition or during a competitive game. So, and that's often a maladaptive and unhelpful form of involvement in some way. So stand back, watch it, enjoy it, love it. These days are going to end one day, so enjoy it while it's happening. That would be my first, probably obvious bit of advice, right?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I mean, it's great advice. I think the challenge is following it all the time, and that obviously opens up a whole set of different avenues, because obviously in the ideal world everything you say is absolutely right, but for whatever reason, whether or not it's the environments we find ourselves in, whether it's what we're chasing, or whether it's our expectation levels, or actually I was thinking at the weekend, because I knew you were coming on and I was watching a game, and I think sometimes, I think for parents as well, it can be their sort of mood that they actually turn up and watch. I was watching one particular parent who, over the tiniest decision of a ball going out of play for a throw-in, was so fired up, and yet the game had barely started, nothing had happened, and you just felt they were sort of coiled up spring, ready to erupt. And I was sort of stood with my dog this weekend at the bottom end, and I really wasn't worried about any of those 50-50s. And I do wonder if there's a bit of a thing about mood there as well when we turn up to our children's sport.
Parents are human beings too, right? And look, I think to speak to what you're potentially suggesting here, as a parent, you love your child. You want the best for your child. And so you want to give them the best opportunities, especially if a child says, I want to be good at this game. This is a game I'm passionate about. This is a game, a sport. I want to have the opportunity to be the best I can be, and potentially go beyond that, because, for instance, what I see on TV, that's amazing to me, and I'd like to give that a go. When the child that you love is saying things like that, of course you want to give them a platform. Of course you want to give them the very best opportunity. And also, the child that you love, you want them to be involved in what you consider to be a fair environment, perhaps an environment where they're being treated fairly, that's not a word, fairly, where perhaps they're exposed to a healthy and safe environment as well. So there are all these kind of narratives or inner stories that parents will hold about the participation of their young players, the exposure to learning and growing that their children are having, the competitive environment that their young children are experiencing. So parents are going to have narratives and stories and beliefs. These narratives and stories are going to be loaded with beliefs and values and goals and interpretations and all these things. And so sometimes often for some parents, and then perhaps sometimes rarely or occasionally for some parents, they experience a serious low mood or worry or a doubt or something that taps into their hostility, perhaps, or their anxiety. And so they can behave externally, they can behave in a manner that might not be appropriate. Internally, if they don't behave in a manner that's inappropriate, they might internally have experiences that they don't necessarily want to have. For instance, a lot of anxiety for the experience or related to the experience of their child. And so with that in mind, I think, as you're kind of alluding to, it's useful for a parent to learn some very simple techniques to be able to manage themselves in and around that competitive arena. And I do want to say that, this does start with interpretation here. When you as a parent, and this is the same when I work with players, when I work with competitors, we'll work on tools and techniques that can help them manage themselves on game day. But I say to them, look, how you feel, what you think and how you behave on a game day on Saturday is influenced by the story you're housing on Thursday and Friday. So if you're going into that game and you're creating a story where you're piling pressure on yourself, or you might expose yourself to a serious amount of anger. That's not what you want. We need to change the story here, right? So it does start with an interpretation of the situation. So I come back to begin with to my first answer, which is, look, you cannot positively influence the game massively. Let me say that to begin with. And you are far better giving your child the autonomy to go off and play and experience, unless that child is put in harm's way. Bullying, racism, sexism, elitism, any kind of ism, that is unacceptable. And that is a time where you might, intervene. But even if you feel, and again, we can come on and talk about this, although this isn't necessarily the topic of the day, even if you feel they're not being coached so well, if that is your opinion, it is still important for you to firstly manage yourself, create a story, an inner story, a dialogue, a narrative that going into that game is very much a stand back. I'm going to be an interested observer here. I'm going to be an interested observer here. I want my child to thrive and flourish, but I am best standing back and allowing him or her to experience this environment. I think that is an important story to weave. Now, on game day itself, if you still feel that you're somebody who can either get very anxious, internal, or very hostile, external, right? Then for me, you need to have technique or a few techniques to be able to manage that. For me, my number one technique, working with anybody in what I would call a performance moment, and you could describe this as a performance moment for you as a parent, because you've probably got to be performative if you tend to get anxious, overly anxious, or you tend to get overly hostile. You need to be performative in that moment. So it is a performance moment. So I talk to players about having a game face. I talk to coaches about having a coach face. You need a parent face in this situation. And to create a parent face, you need to borrow from your memory or your imagination or your perception. Your memory in terms of when you've been a really good supporting parent, when you've been that distant, invested parent in terms of you're stepping back, you're interested, you're watching it, but you're not getting involved, overly involved in the wrong way. What does that look like? What does that feel like? When have you done that really well? What does that look like? What does that feel like? What would others see? Equally, if you haven't got too many examples of actually experiencing that, you might choose to ask yourself, okay, let's use my imagination here. What would a dream parental performance look like here, where I'm doing everything right? What would that look like? What behaviors would I engage in? How would others see me and perceive me? If Gordon was on the other side of the pitch, what would he see for me there? Equally, perception. Well, who do I want to be? I'm not borrowing from who I am in the past. I'm not using my imagination. I'm thinking about a dream parenting scenario. I'm thinking about, who do I want to be? I love the way Gordon MacLelland goes about his parental observation when he's watching his kids play. Okay, what does that look like? If I was like Gordon, what would that? Okay, so I'd be cool and calm. I'd have a cup of tea in my hand, be cool and calm. I'd be cool and calm Gordon. Cool and calm Gordon. So you're being built into a parent face here. So cool, calm Gordon. Okay, I can go out there and be cool, calm Gordon. Or relaxed, focused Gordon. Or just relaxed and focused. Or just cool and calm. What I find is really helpful for players for their game face, for coaches for their coach face, for parents with their parent face, are action-based words. Things that you can be and do and act. Things that you can embody, things that you can tell yourself, that you can instruct yourself on, things that you can choose to be and do and act. So essentially to use your body language, to manipulate your body language in that moment, to act out, to be performative, to be, to do, to act. We can tell ourselves and we can be. So if I choose cool, calm Gordon, okay, I'm going to be cool. I love the way Gordon MacLelland holds himself on the sidelines. There, he's just got a cup of tea, he's got a smile on his face, he's paying attention to his kids. So I can see he's looking at certain things. So maybe he's engaged from the perspective of things that he's going to ask questions about, but he's also having a chat with parents, other parents. He looks relaxed, so he's looking like somebody that other people, especially players, could model in terms of from a temperament perspective. So I love that. I love that from Gordon. So cool, calm Gordon. So that's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to be. That's how I'm going to hold myself. That's what I'm going to embody. That's who I'm going to enact. Cool, calm Gordon. That's what I'm going to tell myself. And so that's what a parent face is. A few action-based words, possibly a model parent, and possibly a concept or something like that. And I think that's something that's really practical that parents can utilize on game day.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely brilliant. I mean, I'm looking forward to the next few weeks, Dan, stood around the sidelines, and they'll say, good to see you were described as cool, calm Gordon, because I remember that one. I know what's coming. They'll say, I remember that one time when I'm not sure you were that cool and calm. And actually, you know what? I think I'm pretty good 80% of the time, and normally in quite good humour about things, which is why I sort of said that. I guess the challenge is, even being aware of all these things, is there's sometimes where, for whatever reason, where you can be quite calm and logical most of the times, there are still some times, as you say, we're only human, where it just doesn't quite feel right. And I don't know, you either feel a little bit more protective, or you see it as a bigger game, which it isn't. I joke with my son. I mean, he played against Man City a few years ago when he was playing academy football. And, I could have batted myself around the head when I said in the week, oh, big game this weekend. And he turned around and said, what, you mean it's another game? And it was like, oh, my goodness, I've even got an 11-year-old telling me a better approach than that, than that of a parent. But I think it is a big challenge. I also think sometimes we can lose sight of the game isn't about us either. And which brings me on to my next question, because everybody's got a different environment. Everybody's home life's different. Everybody's setup's different. Everybody's car journeys home's different. I like the bit you talked about different values and different nuances depending on where we are. I mean, I'm doing some work in Singapore, and it's a very different environment to be working in than it is in a westernized culture. So obviously everybody's got to put these things into their own context for what works best for them in their family unit. But what can we do prior to the game in helping get our children ready for competition? What's our role in that lead up to a game?
Yeah, and I think as you're speaking there, it's making me think about no, it's overtly not about the parents for that 90-minute game or that 80-minute game or that round of golf or couple of sets of tennis. It's not. But the parent is invested, and subsequently you do have to forgive parents for certain behaviors as a consequence. And it can be very challenging for a parent because I know part of the narrative here for any parent is, well, how much can I stretch and how much should I support? Stretch and support. Now, those are my terms. And others might not use those terms, but I mean, I always talk to coaches about having two dials: a stretch dial and a support dial. And I know that parents would feel it part of their role, whether it's school, whether it's sport, whether it's not every, but a lot of child's activities, life activities. Where do I get involved here from a stretch perspective? There would be all kinds of narratives going on in a parent's mind. We call these cognitive scripts, but let's call them narratives or stories, around what it is to be a good parent. And I'm sure we'll have read articles, or parents will have read articles about this parent and if you think about at the moment, the film out about the Williams sisters, and is it Roger Williams, the father? I might be getting his first name wrong, but how he developed, in inverted commas, his children. And obviously Earl Woods, Tiger Woods, his father, was an interesting character is part of Tiger's development. And so I'm sure a lot of parents would have a lot of different narratives around stretch and support, and another term could be putting pressure on a player, really challenging them to be better. And you've also mentioned, interestingly, cross-cultural differences. You mentioned Singapore, and I know, for instance, having been heavily invested in the world of golf, parents in South Korea, especially in women's golf and girls' golf over there, parents are renowned, and I'm not saying it's every parent in South Korea, for taking quite a top-down, pushy perspective. And subsequently, South Korea have had a lot of women's golf champions. Those careers tend not to last long. They tend to burn out quite quickly as a tendency, as a pattern. But it has helped create some very successful golfers, women golfers from South Korea.
Yeah, Dan, can I just interject there? Because there's something I just want to ask you about here, because I think this is where it's difficult for a parent, because it's the stories that we've used there. So obviously the approach of that we see with the Williams sisters stories in tennis. We obviously know the one with Tiger and his upbringing in golf with his father. And then we look at the approach in South Korea. And indeed, for me, some of my work in Singapore, speaking to some of the parents ahead of national championships, their children are 5 or 6, is that actually for them, a bit like the US college system, they're early, I guess not pressure, but their early pushing actually gets them into a better school potentially if the kids show that promise. I'm guessing though, we've picked out some success stories at the other end. There'll be a lot of parents who've tried to adopt a similar approach and it's ended up in a car crash and we don't see the pieces strayed all over the world. I think we've got to make that point, haven't we, before everybody jumps onto a story that worked in one context as well. Is it worth adding something there?
It's worth adding lots of things. Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's huge complexity and nuance to this. And I was, heading to go on and say exactly that. I think, let me be perhaps a little bit more succinct than I have been. I think if we look at this from a participative and a progression and a performance perspective, for me, sports is about participation, the engagement piece. It's about progression, as in improving, as in learning, and it's about performance as well. I think that by and large in a Western culture, which we have right now, we're sitting in right now, that competing at 6 years old is that's a participation stage, and that really needs to be given up to fun, and of course there can be some learning there as well. I think that's absolutely vital. I think that where I was going with what I was saying is around the progression piece here in terms of, and also a bit of the performance piece, is how do I as a parent stretch and support? How do I do this in a healthy and safe manner? Because I still think you can, as a parent, be involved with the stretch side of things. What I'm not saying is it's just support. I am saying there are opportunities to be able to stretch. Well, how do I do that in a healthy manner? For instance, if a young player is going into a game, you mentioned your son's 11. So let's say there's an 11-year-old. And I think that's a position that's kind of jockeying participative sport with progressive sport, progression sport. As in, it is a time, the reality is with some sports where there are some important things that need to be learnt in order for a young person to progress in their sport. And I'm not saying they are make or break things. I am just saying if an 11-year-old in football is scanning more than his or her contemporary, and they had, to all intents and purposes, they had, let's say, equal talent, if that existed, right? Then that player who is scanning more, possibly as a result of a good conversation with somebody, whether that's a coach or somebody else, has a better chance potentially of being more game intelligent when they're older. I think that is both my opinion, my experience, and I believe that is linked to empirical evidence as well. And so I think that 11-year-old age there's a jockeying there. And so I think stretch and support are important here. So as a parent of an 11-year-old, who is ambitious in the game, who takes the game seriously, I took the game seriously. I didn't have very good coaches at 11 years old. I wish I did. I wish I had better instruction. Yes, I wish they were better at setting up implicit learning. Yes, I wish they asked better questions, but I also wish they explicitly taught me better as well. Now, I think a parent of an 11-year-old can stretch their child, not in a shouty way, but for instance, let's use a tool of scaling. So you can ask your young player who's going into a young child who's going into an important game on Saturday, or what is important to them. They're playing in an academy game against, let's say, I don't know, Liverpool. They want to do well. That is their world. They're entitled to want to do well. Okay. We as adults can say, well, it's children's sport. We don't want to adultify it. No, we don't. We don't want to professionalize it. No, we don't. But part of allowing children to be children is allowing children to take children's sport seriously as well, in a healthy and safe way. How can I contribute to that? Give me a mark out of 10 for how you feel right now, with 10 being super confident, 1 being not confident at all. You are using a scaling technique borrowed from solution-focused brief therapy and motivational interviewing in order to strip emotion away. So your child, let's say, says, well, I'm not feeling too bad, but not as good as I have done in previous weeks. So I'm about 6 out of 10. Why so high? Why at 6 and not 4? What are you feeling good about at the moment? What helps you to feel that good? What are you doing there? You are skillfully using scaling to help your child uncover what's been going well. What are their strengths? What's been working? What are they feeling good about? And then potentially you can follow up. Well, what would you have to do to get to 7? Is there anything that you've worked on in the past, that you've done in the past, that you could perhaps use again? Is there anything your coach has said in the past that you could use again to get to 7? Is there anything that we could go and explore together that could perhaps help you go to 7 out of 10 from 6? What are you doing? You're asking an intelligent question around a scaling protocol that is influencing how they feel and what they're thinking, what they're seeing, what they're experiencing, that's potentially going to influence their behaviors on game day. That 7 stretches them a little bit in a healthy and safe way. If they start to suggest some things, then you can support them on that. Stretch and support, stretch and support. That is a healthy and safe way to stretch. So I think there were all kinds of things like that where parents can get involved. But I think my main message, and look, Gordon, this is my opinion, and I'm sure it's not too different to yours. An 11-year-old, a 10-year-old is allowed to take their sport seriously, as your 11-year-old did to you very cleverly, corrected you to help him focus, or to turn down the volume of emotion and not to make this a big deal, to use language, appropriate language that wasn't extreme. So parents can start to read about rational emotive behavior therapy for that kind of thing. Extreme language that turns up the volume of emotion. Your 11-year-old helped you there. Hey, it's not a must-win game. It's just a game. It's a game to be played, enjoyed, focused on, to be taken seriously if that child wants to take it seriously. So I think there are co-creations here to be had.
Yeah, do you know what? It's quite funny. I mean, we haven't got the time today on a topic, but you've touched on a few other things where I think you're absolutely right that, yeah, of course, we don't want to adultify children's sport. But I think we've also got to be careful that it isn't all sun loungers and ice creams, because, you know, I coached a couple of national title under 13 rugby 7 sides, and not because I was brutal in any way, not because I was adult in any way, and I'd coached men's sport, but those kids loved playing rugby and they enjoyed it, and they wanted to be challenged, and they wanted to be stretched, and they wanted to feel safe, and all those things. I think we've got to be really careful in a lot of the dialogue that I see in the sports world, that we're not stripping all of that back, because there are some who want to achieve. And as you say, there are some things at an earlier age that do need to be going on in the background. We can't, as I say, be sun loungers and ice creams and expect to have top 14, 15-year-old players. Doesn't mean that it can't be fun, but I think we've got to be really, really careful with all that. I think, again, it's the healthy balance in the hands of the right people who understand things like you're talking about. Because even in education, children love to be challenged. You know, I think of my 25 years in teaching and coaching, you're allowed to stretch people and challenge them, and kids love getting there. And I always had the belief that even if they don't quite get to the bar that you've set for them, they're going to have got an awful lot further than having no bar set for them at all. So, you know, and supported all the way in trying to get there. And I think that's really important, but I think it's a general sporting topic that we've got onto there.
Yep. I think, I just want to emphasize it, that kids are allowed to take this seriously. It's asking yourself as a parent, well, if my child does take this seriously, how can I create as healthy and as safe environment as possible for them? How can I stretch and support them? It's often through your line of questioning, it's through what you're saying, and it's often asking them, how can I be of support here? I see that you're taking this seriously. This means a lot to you. I hear that. How can I help you to learn and grow through this seriousness? How can I take this serious with you? What boundaries do you set for me in terms of my support for you, for my stretching for you? Find out where they are with that. But I think that's such an important message for young people to hear is, I see you're taking this seriously. I see you're passionate about this. Okay, how can I support you if you want my support? What does that look like? What are my boundaries? How can I best serve you here?
Yeah, and as you say, children are allowed to be competitive, B, take their sport seriously, which lots of them do. It'll be very interesting tonight, Dan. I'm doing some work with the sort of women's RTC, you know, girls close towards academy contracts. And, you know, in and amongst all the disappointment, things like, you know, when parents even say to the children, just to take the pain away a little bit, oh, it doesn't really matter. Well, no, it does, because they wouldn't be upset in the first place next to you. I think those dialogues and those conversations are really important. And I really do believe they're a really big skill, aren't they? The ability to ask open questions that allow the children to reflect, to move those conversations on to what does that look like in us working together, and not trying to take away some of the pain and disappointment by sort of diminishing the fact that it isn't that important, because actually in a child's world, it might be important to them. It's really difficult, which is good that we're having these conversations.
Yep, absolutely.
Do you think that, once we move on to a little bit around goals and outcomes and performance, do you think that if we do ultimately focus on the scoreboard, whether we scored with 50 runs, whether we finished the golf round 3 under, whatever that may be, if the focus is always on that as, let's say, the sole success criteria, because many people do see sport as black and white, let's be honest here, and that's the media that does that, whether or not we're talking kids sport. We see sport in a very simple narrative, I think, in the adult world, if you're not involved in it and not involved in sports science. See it on the telly, glorify winning, anything else is not fairly, well, I suppose it is failure, it's just not deemed as good enough. when that translates into children's sport, do you think that can often cause a lot of the problems that we see for parents in their approach with their children?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, my experience says so. And as you've mentioned, I have empathy for parents here because we're so socialized in sport into outcome and performance. Outcome first. Okay, well, what was the score? Did you win? And then performance next. Did you play well? I thought you played well. I thought you didn't play so well. We're very socialized into outcome and performance. We're not very sophisticated with our relationship with competitive sport or even learning in sport, but let's stick to competitiveness in sport. And by that sophistication, I mean the capacity to strip away outcome and strip away the performance indicators that, let's say, are out of our control, such as scoring, keeping clean sheets, winning points, making birdies and bogeys, if you like, if we're talking golf there. We're not that sophisticated at stripping that away and thinking about as parents, and subsequently helping our children to consider the tasks and what might be called the performance process. There's parts of performance that are, let's say, within our control or more within our control, are more specific, and the things that we need to focus on. So for instance, if we take a footballing scenario, we're somewhat socialized into, as I've said, win or lose. We won 1-0, we lost 1-0. We think about performance. We scored, we didn't score. But we don't necessarily think about, if our child is a striker, let's say, helping them strip things back to focusing on thinking about appraising the things that help them to score, or help them be a good striker, or help them or help them master their position. And so that might be the small movements, or the scanning detail, or the linking up with the midfield or the wingers, all of those mini granular things, tasks, to be task oriented, all of the tasks that help them that will work in servitude to performance indicators, the performance outcomes, if you like, which subsequently served in terms of the game outcomes. So we can think of game outcomes, performance processes. Let's get socialized. Let's socialize ourselves into focusing on talking about, considering and reflecting upon performance processes, the tasks that are specific and controllable. That's a more sophisticated relationship with performance. And that's really where we, again, if we come back to stretch and support, we can help young people. So if I may here borrow from, let's say, my work and my books. So I help players, and I've helped parents to help players create something I call a match script, or you can call it a game script. And what a match or a game script is are 2 to 3 tasks, or even one to 3 tasks that a player has to focus on, the most important things related to the responsibilities in their role or their performance actions that are specific and controllable and positive. And this can work with a seasoned 35-year-old player. It can work with a young 10-year-old player. So, for example, working the other day with a 13-year-old and this young person's parent, this person created a game script, a match script, and created 2 things. And they were a striker, and one of them was attack the 6-yard area. And the other one was positive vocals at all times. Something nice and simple. Attack the 6-yard area was what his coaches wanted him to do when the ball was, in the final third of the pitch and was being delivered in. Positive vocals at all times was something that his coaches wanted him to work on because he was quite quiet, but they had just said be more vocal. We had just stripped that back a little bit more. Positive vocals at all times. Attack the 6-yard area. There were 2 basic things that I wanted this person to focus on and judge his games by. I think there was one other thing that I can't remember right now, so maybe he had a third. So these were 2 to 3 things that he was going to focus on that he could control that were specific. And his objective and he gave his parent, it would happen to be his mum, permission to ask for a mark out of 10 for these after the game. And he was trying to achieve at least a 7 out of 10 for these. And we discussed it in a bit more detail. We don't have time today, but we discussed in a bit more detail what 7 out of 10 actually what it actually looked like. So we had a bit more meat on the bone there. And so there was a little bit of stretch there because he felt he was down at 4 out of 10 for these. And he explained what that looked like. And so there was a bit of a stretch there. Okay, we want to get up to 7. We really want to stretch ourselves. So that's making more attacking runs. That's being more positive with my vocals. It's being brave enough to do that. We talked about using that in training, practicing that in training. He gave his mum permission to stretch him and to ask him those questions after the game. Did he do those things? So what's his parent doing? Stretching and supporting around a game script, match script, which is about being task oriented rather than performance or outcome oriented. And so that, what a fantastic thing for that parent and child to be involved in. They're engaging in psychological theory there. They're engaging in the practical side of psychology. So that's something that a parent can do.
Yeah, and you know what? I think that the key thing there is, which is why I think the parents' piece is becoming more and more prominent, is we've actually given the parents something different to focus on there. And actually, I think that we could do that in grassroots sport. It doesn't even need to be in performance sport. Can we give little, we've tried little games of bingo with coaches where the parents are given 9 things to ring off once in a blue moon, create a full house. Has your child done all these things? And they think, oh, there's a lot more going on here than just, well, have we won today? Were we the best player? And did we score? But I bet that makes life so much easier for that parent, that dialogue's taken place, that they're watching for a few specific things that they're in a bit more control of. And actually that's going to lead to, hopefully, ultimately, a better outcome in the long run. I'm sure it must have helped them.
Well, yeah, and I think there's lots of things to say, isn't there, Gordon? I know you would have had some great guests who probably would have been more coach specific, who would have been talking about the coach-parent interaction and the kind of things that you're talking there, and giving out cards where parents have to rate certain things and just become more granular in their eye, in their observation, in their mindset, be more task oriented. But there's more there in terms of what a parent is doing there, is helping their young child. If there's something specific that their young child is working like that match script, then they are helping that person engage in deliberate practice, for example. And I know I'm talking less about the game day scenario here and more about training or practice, but engaging in deliberate practice, really being a student of the game, being a student of their game. They're helping the environment as a whole be more of a mastery-oriented climate than an ego-oriented climate. So when the language around the pitch, when the language of the parents and the coaches in the organization is ego, is outcome, performance, winning, losing, good game, bad game, score, clean sheet, etc. That is what in psychology we would call more of an ego orientation, when we're helping parents get involved with their parents, involved with their child's game from that granular perspective of a match script. We're getting more task oriented. We're getting more mastery oriented. So it's a much fresher, much more sophisticated involvement in the game and relationship with both competition and practice, if we were talking about practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about this in the work all the time, and everybody's got a responsibility for these environments, haven't they? You can't expect parents to behave this way if the coaches are completely ego orientated. Likewise, you can't expect that if the clubs are doing it. Everybody's got to be aligned in their messaging and values to give ourselves a chance.
And one thing, absolutely. And you're alluding to bringing things together, bringing people together, bringing things together, and bringing some of the things that we've talked about today together. Imagine being in that parent face, being a guide for your child's match script. Being in that parent face, our cool, calm Gordon in this instance, right? And I'm on the sideline just marking out my perception of my child's match script. In the case of the 13-year-old the other day, the runs in attacking the 6-yard area, the vocals, so that I can offer my feedback afterwards. As long as they're specific and controllable things, I think that can be valuable feedback and potentially aligned with what the coach is asking as well, even better. So we're bringing it together. You've talked about, you gave yourself, I think, 80%, 80% of the time I'd manage myself quite well, or historically you have. Well, to turn up the volume to 85, 90, 95%, again, we're aligning, we're bringing together techniques. So, okay, to be 90% of the time out there, or even 100, get close to 100%, I've got to be that cool, calm Gordon. I've got to be that parent face. And I'm going to immerse myself in my child's match script, so that there's not a lot of room here. I'm filling up working memory, which is our short-term memory. I'm filling up that as I'm watching. There's not a lot of room for emotion because I'm focused on that. Now, there's not a lot of room. I'm not saying there isn't any, but there's not a lot of room. Add in a couple more techniques, add in a couple of other things, then, we're really starting to be able to manage ourselves irrespective of the situation.
Yeah, absolutely amazing advice, and just conscious of the time, Dan. Final question then, because we've obviously brought it all together. What's your advice around the sort of post-game, post-competition conversations? Obviously, we've talked about game script and match script there. We've talked about open questions, giving children the chance to reflect. We've talked about, for a lot of people, I think USA college athletes cited the car journey home as their worst sporting memory. And for a lot of us as parents, it can be highly emotive, not just around sport. I think that could be if you get a bad report at school or something else has gone wrong. You get them in the car and you feel like you've got a space and it's time for you to get your 2 pennies worth. And, we've joked with parents that actually, it'd be brilliant if the child led the conversation after the game. And then some parents quite rightfully said, yeah, but what happens if I've got a kid? I wouldn't hear anything till Christmas for the next 6 months if I did that. And do you know what? I get them in the car. They're not on a device. I get some quality time with them. It's the only time in the week I get to have with them and to have a proper conversation. What do you think we can think of? What do you think in an ideal world that post game needs to look like in the car?
Yeah, you see, I think it's interesting, and I know and appreciate that. At the beginning of the question you've posed there, you talked about, we've talked about parent face and match script and potentially a child having a game face, but perhaps I'm horribly biased here, but that's what I love about these techniques is that actually when your child has them and you have them and you're sharing them together, that actually can fuel that conversation, if I may say so here. I mean, the standard answer, I suppose, is that classic 3 questions of, did you have fun or did you enjoy yourself, depending on whether you want to use the word fun or enjoyment. What went well would be the next question. What can go better next time? These divergent questions, divergent as in I can't answer them myself because only my child can answer that one. So they're divergent questions. So asking these questions is a good route into having a conversation. I would say that if you perceive your child has had a poor game and they don't want to talk about it, no doubt this has come up and been sage advice on your podcast historically, but giving them the space, just allowing them the space to experience the emotion. If we don't let people experience emotions, then they can't grow through those emotions. So experience the emotions. And if they experience an extreme of emotion, that's allowed. And so giving them the opportunity to have that, and maybe the conversation in the car can't happen. And that's okay. You know, with the professional players that I work with, it's the same. You know, not all of them. In fact, very few of them, whether there's a win or a loss or playing well or playing poorly, don't necessarily want to get back to me straight after the game. You know, they don't want to feed back. So giving them the opportunity to have that space, I think, is important. I think I've got a couple more things to say here. I think that I do want to emphasize, Gordon, that I think when parents and children collaborate and co-create on these techniques, that can be a great port of call. Give me a mark out of 10 for your game face. You know, not just what went well, which is still a good question. Give me a mark out of 10 for your game face, or give me a mark out of 10 for your mindset. I ask my players, my clients, 2 questions. Give me a mark out of 10 for performance. Give me a mark out of 10 for mindset. Basic scaling again, but again strips away emotion. And then we might dig a bit deeper. Why so high? What do you got to do better next time to get a higher mark? But I might dig a bit deeper into the mindset side. Give me a mark out of 10 for game face. What went well with game face? What went well with script? Have we got to change up that script? So I think these can be a useful forerunner to create a deeper sense of evaluation.
Yeah.
I think that if you have a child who doesn't like to talk about it in the car, then it might be a sense of patience over time while probing what might afford the opportunity to have these conversations after the game. For example, and I'm not saying these are easy questions to ask, and I'm not saying these are questions that are going to be answered anyway in a positive or an affirmative way, but just would there be any times that you would be willing to have a conversation in the car on the way home and give me some feedback? What questions might prompt you to want? What conversation might prompt you to want to have this conversation? If you were to have a conversation with me about the game, okay, what might I have done as your dad or your mum to help you want to have that conversation? Those are the kind of questions you might ask. If there was one question, if you allowed me one question, if you were willing to give me one bit of feedback, what would that question be? Again, I understand and appreciate that you might not get a response that you want. That's okay. That's fine. That's okay. That's fine. Let's be patient here. That's just not part of your co-creation. That's just not part of your collaboration at the moment. And that's okay. And I'm sure parents out there listening in could think of far better questions than I've just posed there that might give them a better chance to find out when that conversation, when that car journey conversation can happen. What might be a forerunner?
Absolutely brilliant, Dan. I think a couple of those, as I've joked on many podcasts, that I quite honestly could have gone through therapy for my car journey homes as a parent. I've got a lot better from those early days as a 6-year-old to where I am today, but we all learn. But I think that whole co-collaboration thing and working together, particularly as our children get a little bit older, as you say, and start moving out of that participation phase, I think it's just brilliant because I think ultimately we know they need to take ownership. We know they need to have that autonomy. They need to have a voice. And I think our way of working with them to create that is pure gold, really. Yet can sometimes not deliberately be missed. And I hope that our listeners today will take the opportunity to think about what we've talked about and put it into their contexts in their houses, their sports venues and their car journeys home. So Dan, thank you so much for joining us. I'm looking forward to having you on the Expert View later in the year, which I know we've discussed. And I think we'll pick up a couple of these topics because I know match day and competition is a huge part for parents.
Well, no, look, thank you. I've really enjoyed that conversation. I'm exhausted now. You've knackered me out. So it must have you must have got some things from me there. So, but it's just been an honour to be part of your podcast, Gordon, and I wish everybody the best.
Yeah, thanks, Dan, and we'll speak again soon.
Thank you for listening. Check us out at parentsinsport.co.uk.